morning and welcome to the Guerra Plaza Revitalization Advisory Committee of July 2nd, 2021. And can we start first, please, with a roll call?
Hi, yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Okay, Chair Sneddon.
Here.
Vice Chair Wiscombe.
Here.
Commissioner Drury.
Here.
Commissioner House.
I'm here.
Commissioner Reed. Commissioner Longstreet.
We can't hear you, Commissioner Longstreet.
Here. Can you hear me now?
There you are. Yeah, coming in loud and clear. Thank you. Council Member Harmon.
Here.
Commissioner Perry.
Present.
Committee Member Peterson.
Here. Thank you.
Committee Member Edelman. Okay, that's everyone for today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, and then Mr. Hess, do we have any preliminary matters?
No, Madam Chair, we do not. Thank you for asking.
Thank you. And we'll move on to the agenda items, and thank you for coming in on this holiday weekend. And we have some updates and then some further considerations. Thank you, Mr. Hess.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. And Leaf, if I could ask that you pull up and share your screen and we can begin the presentation.
Yeah, I can. Give me 1 second here.
So while Leaf is opening up that first screen, thank you, everyone, and welcome. And as Chair Sneddon said, thank you for fitting this in right before a long weekend. So we hope you all have an enjoyable and safe 4th of July. This is our first meeting since the joint work session that we had with the Historic Landmarks Commission. And you all received the minutes from that meeting. So we're not going to go through everything that took place over those 4 hours, but suffice it to say it was a very successful meeting, and we as the design team felt really great about what took place. So next slide, please. So here is our agenda for the day. It's pretty straightforward. We're going to touch on the parking and traffic study that is coming up. We're going to go through some of the comments and suggestions made by the Historic Landmarks Commission as we go through the project details. Next slide, please. So first, we anticipate the parking and traffic study to begin in the next couple of weeks. Now, you may recall we did a preliminary study back in 2019, and we were just about to do an in-depth study just as COVID hit. So there was no normal to study. So now that we are in the new normal, we have a State Street that is very much alive, and people are getting back in their cars. So we need to better understand the demand. And having spent more time in the plaza in the last 2 weeks, I'm really looking forward to this report to better understand the current demand. So here's the diagram from the scope of work that Associated Transportation Engineers will be doing that will include car and truck counts, visual and video documentation, and determining the pedestrian flow. So we should have that report completed sometime in July, and this information will help us in the design and help us decide what to do with De La Guerra Street. Next slide, please. And Leaf, I believe you are going to begin here.
Yeah, thank you, Brad. And good morning, everyone. It's good to be here. We on May 7th, as everyone remembers, we had a joint meeting of the HLC and this committee. And we had a long, robust discussion on a number of topics. On on the screen here is a full list of the items that were recorded in the minutes from that meeting. And there's some are grayed out, some are black. So the grayed out items are those topics that didn't really generate a lot of comment, or there was general consensus on, or they were deferred to a future meeting because we weren't ready to talk about it yet, or the commission wasn't ready. So what we're going to focus on today are just the items in black, the highlighted points, which were the items that did generate some comment from the HLC. I have with me today my colleague, Deddy Pikett, who many of you probably know. He's an architect that leads our Santa Barbara architecture practice, and he's going to present some of our thoughts on the arcade. I skipped over the slide. There we go. Deddy, are you there?
Yes,
Okay, I'll hand it over to you.
thank you, Leaf. So again, we're reflecting back on the joint meeting and some of the comments, particularly as they pertain to the arcade. I think it started with some questioning about what was the purpose of the arcade, and then asked for some explanation of the design, and then we got some comments back that was, one of which was concerned about whether or not using an arcade with arches that reflected the arches on City Hall, was the right approach, particularly since it, maybe I think there was a thought that it might be taking away from the significance of the arches in the City Hall. So we went back and took some of the other comments and decided to explore a couple of other options for you to consider. And then I want to show those to you in a moment and explain, how they work and whether, how we kind of came to them, and hopefully get some feedback on what direction we take from there. I think the one thing I would say is that in doing this exploration, there's still a strong feeling that the arches are the most appropriate one. In other words, the arcade with the arches and the pavilion in the center. We also did some rethinking about the way in which we had previously featured the stage, which was off to one side, really a dais, 18 inches above the grade around it. So a raised surface for small performances, that sort of thing. One of the other things that came out of the discussion was that we would move the quatrefoil feature that we had previously kind of centered at the end of the arcade next to the news press building and move it to the center. And that really opened up some new possibilities for how we might feature the stage and the sort of pavilion centerpiece in the arcade, and really make that work now that we kind of freed up that space in front of that arcade to, for audiences to gather, and especially for, smaller informal type of gatherings and performances. So if you'll go to the next slide, I'll walk you through the three different options. So this is the arcade that we previously presented. And then you can see that we've moved the stage with the perimeter steps 18 inches above the existing, or let's say the proposed surface of the plaza, to create this sort of performance venue. And you can see I've kind of illustrated it by showing several musicians performing there, with an audience and just sort of some general entourage to kind of give it a little bit of life. And again, you can see the City Hall in the background there. And so the arches are kind of in a sense, a sort of reference to the City Hall, and continue that sense of an arcade. But again, I want to point out the primary purpose for this structure, which we can think of as a kind of an architectural folly, in the sense that it's in some ways we can look at it as being decorative, aesthetic feature, but it has a really important and powerful purpose, which is to enclose the plaza at that side where the parking lot is located, and where we really feel like the sort of energy, the stability of the plaza is interrupted by that open parking lot. So by featuring this arcade, which is also transparent, so you can actually see through it, see the vegetation behind it, etc., and ultimately probably the mountains over it on a clear day. So it serves this purpose of creating a performance venue, but it can serve multiple other kinds of purposes as well, some of which are yet to be explored. For example, we could have some interpretive exhibits there that reference the Harmer Adobe previously located there. It could provide a location for vendors to be temporarily located, a little coffee stand, something like that, when there's a lot of activity. But its most important function is, first of all, to enclose the plaza, and secondly, to provide a performance venue. So if you go to the next slide, I'll show you a couple of alternatives. You'll notice that on the previous slide, we were proposing a kind of more rustic gable style roof. We had originally proposed this kind of more pediment, I would call it, style of roof over the pavilion. And we also want to explore just putting a very simple hip roof over that. So I just want to make you aware that those are a couple of options that we looked at. We ended up lighting on the gable end, feeling that it was kind of more appropriate, and just given that it has a little bit more of a sort of historic rustic feel. And so that's the arcade with arches. So if we go to the next slide, again, taking from the comments, the question was, should we consider something different, something that does not involve arches, but rather in this case, square openings with columns and a cornice at the top, and then the pavilion. In this case, we're illustrating it with a hip roof over it, and kind of a cornice detail around that. But in essence, it serves the same functions. It's transparent, you can see through it. It still has the performance stage or raised portion there. And so with respect to the purpose that it's serving, it still very much serves that. It's really an aesthetic decision as to whether something that differentiates from the arches at City Hall would be more appropriate, or whether in fact the arches that we illustrated in the first illustration is the more appropriate approach. And then finally, it was suggested by one of the HLC members that we explore a trellis type structure. And if you'll go to the next slide, you'll see that. This is a trellis that's supported by a series of columns. I think someone mentioned that there was some somewhat similar covered trellis at the Libero Theater. We took a look at that and just kind of projected that idea. And so in this particular instance, we're showing this trellis with columns. We keep the centerpiece with the pavilion with the gable end and the performance stage. All those elements remain the same, but the aesthetics are significantly different than the other two alternatives. So I think that gives you kind of an idea of some possibilities. Again, I think our preference is, and some of the folks that we've polled on the subject, I would say that the arched arcade is the preference, but you know, I think there's an openness to the other ideas as well. So that's where we're at with this, and we can, you know, we'll obviously would like to get your feedback here and thoughts and preferences, and then we'll you know, propose those at the next meeting with the HLC to get closure on what the design for this element should be.
Thank you, Mr. Piker. Thank you for showing us those options so far. Mr. Hess, do you think that we should pause here and discuss the arcades, or did you want to get through the entire presentation first?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually think we should go all the way through because
Okay.
we only have the 4 primary topics to discuss. I think we can revert back to the slides.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Betty. We'll move on to the next topic, which was the interactive water feature. This probably garnered the most conversation in the HLC meeting on the 7th, and lots of talk about various opportunities and concerns. Here's the 3 primary takeaways, and this is what was documented in the minutes. The idea of moving it towards the center of the plaza, that the commission could accept the idea as long as it disappeared when it wasn't in use. And then another comment about making it more of a having a portion of it be more of a traditional looking fountain that had some sculptural element as well. So you can see here 2 plans. One on the left represents the plan that we took to the HLC. It looks more technical because we've been doing some of these ideations in AutoCAD just for flexibility of exploring options. And then one on the right looks at this notion of moving the quatrefoil north more towards the center. And it's an interesting exercise. I think the one on the right actually looks quite pleasing with that feature centered in the plaza. However, you know, as has been mentioned multiple times, you don't experience the plaza from the air. And on balance, we still believe the south end makes the most sense, the plan on the left. For a couple of reasons. It activates the deepest part of the space without dominating the entire plaza. If you can imagine on a hot day with children enjoying this space and parents sort of around the perimeter, in the scheme on the right, that type of activity could really dominate the entire plaza because it's cutting it in half. And the one on the left, it really is focused at one end, and then half the plaza would still be essentially open for other just general activities. The concern that's been raised several times that there's a conflict with having a water feature oriented in front of the stage. I think in any case, either of these plans, if there was an event on the stage, if there was a concert or something, the water would be turned off regardless. So I think that in practical terms, that's not really a conflict so much. And we kind of like the way that that accent feature is actually centered on the stage. It provides kind of a nice orientation to the arcade as well. This is a good representation of how the paving patterns and the symmetry of the plaza appear from eye level. It's much less apparent than in the plan views, and I think this illustrates that quite well. There was a suggestion to separate the water feature and the quatrefoil pattern and move the water feature off to the side. In other words, the quatrefoil would simply be an ornamental piece of paving, and the water feature could be moved away to make it more inconspicuous. We did think about that at length, but we really feel strongly that the water and the paving pattern reinforce each other and create a stronger sense of place and that there's something there. And so we're recommending to stay with the water combined with this quatrefoil feature as a single feature. I also want to mention before we move on from this topic that it's come up in a couple of meetings that the water feature would be a recirculating system, and it would have filters to treat and disinfect the water. All that's regulated by the county health department. So if anyone's been wondering about that aspect of it, that would be the case. And Brad, I think you're going to take this one.
Great. Thank you, Leith. So the HLC's request was that we work with the building owners next to the proposed restroom to determine if there is a solution with moving the restroom to the other side of the plaza. So we've looked again, we went back, looked at all of the locations that we previously considered and applying all that criteria with which we evaluated those other locations, such as safety, access to State Street and the plaza, convenience, etc. We still feel that Stork Placita is the best location. So there are two options that we're still considering. Leif, if you could go to the next slide, please. One is this location that you're looking at, which was brought up by the owners in our joint work session. They're the owners of the 726 State Street, and it's potentially doing a property swap with them. So you're looking at the backside of the Ironworks space. The front side of their building is the Supercuts building, and there's a long wall along Stork Placita. So the idea is that we would exchange potentially this space for a portion of the landscaping in Stork Placita, so that when they did a larger project, the building could actually be wider. So there are several options that we're looking at. But I had a great conversation with the owners this week just to make sure that they were comfortable with this, presenting this in public again. And both of us, as we went through this discussion, realized that it definitely warrants further discussion. So as I said, they have some variables to work through to make sure that this could work in the future. But just to let you know, it is moving forward. But the concept is to put two ADA compliant restrooms side by side within that Ironworks space. Now you can move to the next slide, Leif. Thanks. So the other location is one that you've seen before. It's actually in Stork Placita, and it's just around the corner from what we were just looking at. And here's the approximate location of that restroom that would be along the wall there. And back to you.
Thank you. The planting, we had a good discussion on the planting. The placement of the trees that we're going to show you today is quite similar than what we looked at the last time. The commission really were probing on the rationale for this more casual, informal layout, and we talked a little bit about the pros and cons of a more regular spacing and that type of thing. And then there was also concerns about the planters themselves around the base of the trees, that they're all shown to be in raised planters at seat wall height. So we'll show you a slide on this. So as I mentioned, the placement of the trees is essentially the same, with the one difference that we've removed the trees that we were showing in front of the casa because of potential impacts to the casa itself, and also to respect the view corridor along the street up to the mountains. We didn't want to block that. The commission and the whole group were ultimately comfortable with this random placement of the trees along the edges. And And the same goes for the planters. We believe that the planters are very, very important to protect the vegetation for one, and to provide ample casual seating in and around the plaza without needing to put out benches on any given day. And also to help define some of the outdoor rooms. Those sort of landscape features really help to sort of create, the dining experience along the bottom edge there, and at the top, that little zone between the arcade and City Hall. It helps to make it semi-enclosed and create a sense of space. The dashed green lines are the existing trees, so you can see what will remain from today. The palm trees, incidentally, are also existing. We didn't highlight all of those down the placita, etc. But the big pepper trees there, there's 2 trees that we're going to save sort of behind where the arcade is shown. And then everything else in color would be new plantings. The sort of the green, the dull green color would be the olives. The pink trees are the pink trumpet trees. And then there's 2 new trees kind of behind the arcade that are to be determined, but to help provide a green sort of backdrop to that feature. Brad?
Great. Thank you, Leith. So next is the City Hall frontage. One of the expanded scopes of work that we gave to RRM is to basically redo the front of City Hall, which is, if you've been there recently, it's in desperate need of this. So the charge by Anthony Grumbine, who is the chair of HLC, was, you really need to understand exactly what you're doing and why you're doing it. So we took the time to really investigate and rethink, what is the purpose statement for the front? What do we want to accomplish here? So the why in this is to reconnect the front of City Hall with the community again. The what in this is, it should be beautiful. It should be a welcoming space that complements the historic beauty of the building and provides a connection to the expanded De La Guerra Plaza and a visual connection to Anacapa Street. And how this will be done is, it needs to provide spaces for rest and quiet contemplation, space for small venues or ceremonies, and a prominent space for the relocated flagpoles and historic palm. So this space will provide Santa Barbara also with a model landscape to emulate for beauty and sustainability. Next slide, please. So looking at the safety, as we talked with those inside the City Hall, we had a great conversation with several members. This was one of the primary needs. The lighting is terrible in the evening, so that needs to be improved. And currently there's a hedge that surrounds the entire area, and that provides some really dark spaces for people to occasionally go to sleep, and we really want to open that up and improve the safety. In speaking with Keith DeMartini in finance, he had a great suggestion, which was that this could be a wonderful opportunity for small events or ceremonies that we have throughout the year, or even for staff meetings. So the front of the City Hall could be used for smaller venues like that. Now, in terms of wayfinding, there are people that come to City Hall for a myriad of reasons, but being able to just have a better way of showing them how to get into City Hall is what we're after. So currently there are many who walk up to City Hall and go either through the Anacapa entrance or down De La Guerra Plaza entrance. They pay their bills or they take care of their business at the counters. One of the ideas is to both make it more convenient for paying bills, but also to reduce the number of parking spaces needed, is to provide a drop box directly across the street from Anacapa, or directly across Anacapa Street, from City Hall. It would be similar to a library box where it's on the left side. So you basically drive up, drop your bill in, and you continue on your way, and you don't need to use a parking space. Keith loved that idea. So operationally, we need to figure some things out, but that will definitely be part of this proposal as well. And then lastly, The flags that are currently in De la Guerra Plaza, we'd like to relocate to a prominent spot right on the corner. This will not only help the interaction of the community with City Hall, it will be a clear indication that this is the front of City Hall. So pretty excited about that part as well. And I'm not sure if we have a visual on this. I can't remember. Leaf, if you could go to the next slide. Yeah, so the front of City Hall on the left is what it currently looks like. It's very dry, barren, and we want to basically make this a model landscape. So we're looking forward to this very much. Next slide, please. And this is you.
All right, thank you. So yeah, I guess I'm going to just go back briefly here. So this is everything to the left of the green line is our existing photos. It just highlights how this existing landscape really doesn't have a very good relationship to the public street. The hedge is acting really counter to that goal. And then like the photo at the top right left of the green line really shows there's some stuff that looks almost like the back of house, and that's where we think we've been told that people sleep and things like that. So it really does need to be opened up a lot, and some of these character photos on the right are the sort of the way the inspiration we would take it really is reflective of a lot of the landscape materials and plants that you see in the EPV, especially just up De La Guerra Street, just a little bit around the Historical Society and stuff. So this is kind of more of a technical expression of the same thing. On the left is the existing site. The trees are not shown just for clarity, but you can kind of see what it is today. On the right is our proposed change to that. So one of the biggest things is we remove the hedge completely and open up the whole corner to the street, to passers-by and to people entering the plaza. We've also created a lot more sort of usable flat space. So now that the hedge is gone, we can actually create sort of like a smaller sort of mini plaza, if you will, that runs north-south, where that decomposed granite label is. So that would be where you could just sit quietly and read a book, or you could have take photographs for incoming elected officials, that type of thing, or smaller events. You'll also see a couple of things here. The flagpoles that Brad alluded to on the corner give them some more prominence and stature, so that it feels like you've arrived at City Hall. The relocated palm tree to the top right there is the Washingtonia that's currently in the plaza, sort of in the middle of the grass today. We're showing it move to here really because we're concerned about its long-term health with the new project in the plaza, and also it frees up, gives us some more flexibility for achieving our programmatic goals in the plaza too. That represents a shared street, that sort of tan-colored hatch pattern there. So that would all be flat. There's two different materials. You see in the street itself is a brick, and then it transitions to a decomposed granite that has a similar character and quality that the Casa courtyard has. And then there's some short-term parking. Now that would be able to be controlled by the use of removable bollards at either end of it. So it could be available for public use for popping into City Hall, paying a bill on any given day. But it could also be closed on a weekend or evening for a special event. And then the planting, some of the trees around City Hall, the city arborist has taken a look. Some of them are in less than great condition. So the two that are hatched there would stay. That's the huge pine tree, and then another tree to the other side of the front steps, and then everything else would be replaced with sort of olives and plants in keeping with the palette that we've got going on in the plaza. And finally, this is the last slide, and there's not a lot to show you regarding this. It's more of a refresher of what our current plan is. We've been continuing to coordinate with a vendor who provides the underground trash system, and we've identified these two locations shown in red. They've moved around a little bit since you last saw it, particularly the one on De La Guerra Street, because there's some heavy infrastructure coming through that street with Edison and other things. So we've kind of been fine tuning it as we've been going, but they're in the same general zones, and that will be continued to be worked on as we go. So this is just more like a FYI slide. And Brad.
Great. Thank you, Leith. And again, just next steps, just to remind you again, we're doing the parking and traffic study, commences within the next week or two, and we're hoping to have that report in July. Another thing that we have realized is as part of all of this changed in the last year and a half, it's been a little over 2 years since we had the public workshop in Casa de la Guerra. And so we want to do another online email survey just to make sure that we're still on track with the changing in the community. State Street's very different than what it was 2 years ago. So that will be taking place sometime in the next few months as well. Now, depending on the results of items 1 and 2 will really help us determine whether we need another advisory committee meeting prior to going back to HLC, or whether it's just a confirmation of everything that we're doing now, and then we can go directly to HLC. So stay tuned on the results and next steps. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Hess. That was a lot to cover. So thank you. And I want to echo what you were saying about the success of the joint meeting with HLC. I found that very productive to be able to just have a conversation, and members of HLC were able to ask members of this committee about why a water feature is important, for instance, or what the thinking was behind certain features. And it was really helpful, I think, on both sides to be able to go back and forth. So we'll keep that in mind when we make a recommendation about how to proceed at the end there. Do you think it's more effective that each member sort of give their first take on what we discussed today, or that we take each one in detail? How would you?
I think it would be great if we could go take a topic at a time and have a discussion. We could go back, look at the slides, and then if everyone could just chime in on that particular topic, and then we can move on to the next. I think that was very effective the last time we met.
So shall we start with the arcade?
Yes, let's.
And if there are members of the committee, did we like going in order where I call on each of you and in the order of the agenda, or did you want to just come on if there are things that you want to say about the arcade? Or if, well, I'll start with Vice Chair. Okay, there we go. And if I'll start with Commissioner House. Do you have comments on the arcade?
I'm ambivalent on the arcade. I think that there are sound reasons for any of those approaches. So I'm not going to take a stand on that, because I think there will be some strong opinions on HLC. So I think all of those are valid approaches. So I think that's pretty much all I have to say about the arcade.
I think on today's meeting, first I should check if there's public comment, or if we're asking questions at this point, or do we have public comment? While I'm waiting to hear if there's public comment, I'll say that I think even when you are a representative of, say, HLC, that it's helpful to have your views of if there is a preference moving forward to present to HLC. I think we want to have it as discussed as possible going into that of what our preference would be as a grouping. So when we're making our comments or discussion about that, and I did have some questions about the arcade as well. Do we have public comment?
Yes, it looks like we do have public comment.
Great. So then I suppose first we'll see if there are any questions from the commissioners at this point before we take public comment. And we'll start with questions on the arcade. I had a question about the design. If there were things like ceremonies, if some of those columns might be so wide that the visual line might be blocked, and if that was a consideration on that. That was a question I had about that. And then I did see Vice Chair Wiscombe. There, Mr. Vice.
Yeah, question is directed to me. No, I mean, the column widths, can vary. Certainly, you don't want, in the case of the arcade, you wouldn't want the columns to be too narrow because it would give a kind of a spindly effect, which would not be aesthetically pleasing. So there has to be kind of a right balance, but certainly there's a little bit of flexibility in that, particularly the one with the square openings, square arches, if you will. Those columns in that illustration, they're pretty muscular, and I think those could certainly be reduced a little bit to increase the flexibility or kind of give it more of a lighter feeling.
Thank you. And then some of them you described as like an 18-inch rise, but then on some of the drawings there were sort of stairs. I think on the square columns. And is that just a design one would go with the other, or that's something we could discuss, or was there a preference for one or the other?
Well, in all three cases, the so-called stage platform is the same. And the idea is that there would be 3 6-inch risers, so for a total of rise of 18 inches. And we still have to fine tune the make it work with the actual grade that we're going to end up with as we refine that. And then there is a ramp, a handicap accessible ramp just behind a portion of the western portion of the arcade, so it'd be fully accessible as well.
Thank you. And Vice Chair Wiscombe, did you have questions on the arcade?
No, Madam Chair, it wasn't on the arcade.
Okay, sorry, getting a little glitch getting started here. Are there any other questions on the arcade? Okay, and then are there any questions on the water feature?
Madam Chair,
Oh, yes, Commissioner Drury.
I'm sorry, I was taking care of my mother's breakfast, so I missed, all I have is on the screen, oral public comments. I'm a little confused there, but may I comment on the arcade?
Yes, please. Well, we're taking questions at this point. We haven't had public comment yet. Did you have a question on the arcade? Sorry, I was not very clear on process at the beginning there. But at this point, we're just going to go through each topic if there are questions. I think we lost Mr. Drury. Vice Chair Wiscombe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question on the water feature, my understanding, and this would be for Mr. Hess, my understanding is from our prior meetings on this, that the closer you get to the CASA, the greater the risk of archaeological findings. Is that, am I assuming that? So if we were to move the water feature to the center, are we are we in, I guess, greater chance of archaeological issues, Mr. Hess?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Wiscombe, yes. The further we move in that direction towards Casa de la Guerra, the more likely we will hit resources.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
That's all I have, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And then do we have any questions on the restrooms? Okay. Questions on the planting discussion? Placement of the trees, the raised beds, the...
Madam Chair,
Mr. Drury, yes, welcome back.
I was out of, I mean, I'm in some time warp here. Anyway, I do have a question. I'm sorry I didn't read, but about the arcade. So this
Yes.
is for Mr. Pikert. Were the comments that we considered on the HLC to align the arcade with City Hall as opposed to having it at an angle? Were any of those three options reflecting that comment from the Landmarks Commission?
That's a great question. The alignment of the arcade, the way it is now, is basically taking into account the existing vegetation, the alignment of the historic wall, etc. And so moving it back would have an impact that we didn't feel was going to be beneficial. So we basically aligned the arcade with the kind of existing topography, vegetation, all of that, rather than trying to artificially align it with the arcade at the City Hall.
That answer your question, Mr. Drury?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. And then do we have questions on the City Hall frontage? This is something we haven't really discussed much before. And if there are questions on the frontage.
Yes, Madam Chair, I do. This is Michael Drury.
Okay, Mr. Drury, and then Ms. Locksley.
Yes, I'm wondering why there's the cluster of, I see 3 flagpoles at the corner of Anacapa and De La Guerra. And I wonder why they're not framing City Hall itself, that they're sort of off to the side if you're looking directly at, and the elevation on the Anacapa side of City Hall is really beautiful. And it's just been sort of neglected over these years. And I'm wondering why the flagpoles aren't presented in a more formal manner in front of City Hall. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is my, can you see my screen?
I cannot. Oh, yes, yes,
Are you seeing the slide?
yes.
Okay. Commissioner Drury, good question. Maybe I could, I don't think I actually mentioned that those flags are the flags that are currently in the plaza. That would be the same, serve the same purpose, relocated to that corner. That was one thing I didn't mention. We actually did show them moved closer to City Hall, relating to the facade a little bit better. That huge tree was getting in our way. It comes out 20, 30 feet from the building. So it was pushing the flags further away from the front steps anyway. And we thought it would be, this was just the option we took to put them out on the street for a prominent sort of statement at the corner that signified that it was a civic building.
Thank you. And Ms. Chair Snedden, one more question about City Hall.
Oh, yes, please.
As far as vegetation goes, I'm looking down at I think the proposal is on the right on my screen. Is that correct?
Yes.
So there are you have the walkway going up to the steps, and I think I guess that's a comment. Are those 3 trees that are parallel with Anacapa? Are those actually trees, This
But
is
is it
for
good? Yeah,
Mr.
and if,
McKay.
Yeah, yes, they are. That would be, they would be sort of in this, see the photo on the bottom right, that the olives in the DG?
Yes.
It would be a similar character to that. They would be smaller plaza trees, probably olives like we're putting in the plaza on the other side.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Commissioner Longstreet.
My question is about accessibility at this entrance, and what are our requirements, and is there a way to meet those? If this I don't think of this as the front. I've never thought of it as the front of City Hall, so it's a new concept to me. I always think of it as the back door, and if it is becomes the front door, what do we need to do for that?
Great question. I'm with you. I also thought of it as the back, and I'm looking forward to it having a refreshed look as the front. And I think the accessibility question, Mr. Hess, maybe?
Sorry, the video took a little bit. To answer the question, we need to provide an accessible entrance, and that currently exists on the De La Guerra side of the building. So we would not need to make this front of the building comply for an additional ADA access. Perhaps Leif would like to expand on that, but we don't need to do anything to change the front of the building. And you know, I think that comment actually is perfectly suited to why this needs to be done. The address is, I believe, 735 Anacapa Street. It's not De La Guerra Street. And there's a reason why people don't associate this as the front of City Hall, is because it's not very welcoming and people don't use it. People tend to use the De La Guerra Street side. So hope that
And I
answers.
would add to, it's a comment, but I love the idea of drive-up drop boxes to pay bills, and that does also increase accessibility without having to come all the way in to pay that water bill. Okay. Then I had a question here about the relocated palm tree, and where does it go? The historic palm, where does it go in the frontage? I missed which one. Ah, there it is. Okay.
Yeah, you see it there at the top right.
Okay, thank you. And then the green are existing.
Yeah, existing trees that would remain.
Okay.
And then there are other trees around up against the building that are in less than ideal health that we'll look at maybe replacing.
Okay. Thank you. And one more question I had about that. When we had seen in previous presentations, sandstone boulders that were maybe could sit on or climb on, not sure. Where in the scheme of what we're looking at, where would those be if we were still considering those?
Good question. They would be, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but there's a space between what would be the new arcade and the corner of City Hall in front of the historic adobe wall. Do you see those little shapes there?
I do.
Sorry, it's so small. I don't have a slide focused on that, but that would be there.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions about City Hall frontage at this point? Okay. And then I guess our last category for questions would be trash management. I don't have any questions on that one, if anybody. Okay, so now we'll go to public comment. I apologize. And after public comment, then we'll discuss each of these items. Thank you. And if fellow committee members would like to come on screen while we're having public comment as well.
Okay, so for public comment, we have Patrick O'Dowd. Patrick, I'm going to unmute you and then you unmute yourself. Go ahead, Patrick, and unmute yourself. Okay, Patrick, we'll come back to you. We're going to move on to Robin Elander. All right, Robin, we're going to unmute you. There you are. And then please unmute yourself.
Hello, committee members. Oh, there we go. Thank you so much, committee members. I really appreciate all of your excellent, thoughtful work on this really important civic project for our downtown community. I just really want to give my appreciation for the depth of thought you're going into this. A few things I wanted to mention and check in on. A lot of the things that you are considering including in the space really conjures up the question of how will the space be managed, meaning staffing for maintenance, security or ambassadors, really handling the public use, the planters, those types of things will need to be thought about as how this all works together. Also the access to State Street for unloading and loading. I know you're doing your parking and vehicular study this month, which will really reveal some good information. But I'm still seeing that there's trees in De La Guerra Street. And this is certainly a significant area for unloading and loading for access to State Street. So I'm also wondering if there's possibly the vehicles that might be using that space may have, say, automatic retraction of ballards for permitted users or something in that direction. Also, public art features such as the water feature that's being presented here are often more delicate. And I'm wondering if these would be able to be driven over and not compromised for large event setups and things of that nature, because of course we know Fiesta's coming back. They're going to be using that space. They're probably going to want to continue using that space, and those types of things will be important in being able to make this an accessible use space for our community. But overall, really exciting how this is going, and congratulations. Keep up the great work.
Hi, Patrick. Are you ready to speak? We're going to unmute you to see if you. Okay, never mind. We're going to move forward. John Chafee, we're going to unmute you. So please unmute yourself.
Yes, John Chaffee speaking. We're the owners of the 726 building. And we had requested that you folks look elsewhere for placement of the bathroom, even considering portable trailers that could be expanded in terms of numbers of people for different events behind the arcade. But that idea doesn't seem to have been considered. If it has, and you found that the current location that Brad has found is better, we can try and work with that, but we would have several asks from the city because we'd be losing that commercial space. We actually think aesthetically it looks very good. And it does keep Stork Placida open, so its area doesn't feel blocked. It doesn't become a place for homeless to hang out. It's a nice entrance if you don't put the bathroom on the side of the building, but you put it on the back where it is. So, but we would have several asks from the city if we were to consider that location. It would probably entail relocating that tenant and allowance perhaps in time for when we would do a build out beyond the AUD current limitation for the 726 property if we were to give up that space. So anyway, for your consideration, we think it looks great. We think it's much better than on the side of the building. And we think we can work with it if the city's willing to work with us. And so that's where we are. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, James Main, you're next. We're going to unmute you, and then you please unmute yourself. whenever you're ready to speak as well. James Main, we've got you unmuted.
Hello?
We can hear you.
Okay, hello. I've been in the Arinya Adobe for 30 years. There's 6 tenants in there and a property owner involved. And we're very concerned about access to our building, which we've had for many, many years. And it's really a concern. We have deliveries and clients and meetings there, and we don't see an adequate parking plan for our building. And we'd hate to be victims to this project. We'd like to work with the project, but I don't see a real parking plan materializing here at all. Big concern. I think the project's a little bit ambitious. What are we going to do about State Street? If we close State Street, do we want to close De La Guerra Plaza? Is that too much empty space? There are clients and people that need access to the area. And when you deny parking and access, you congest the surrounding neighborhoods and push the parking way out to where other people are burdened by this problem. Personally, I think it's a nice project, but I think it needs to be confined to the loop and make it beautiful. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Chair, we're about to unmute you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. It's okay. I did want to respond to some of the speakers, but I think we'll save it for comments. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, back to public comments. We've got Nancy Capone. Nancy, we're going to unmute you, so please unmute yourself and begin to talk when you're ready.
Hello, thank you. My name is Nancy Capone, and I also have a question regarding the removal of critically important accessible parking in the De La Guerra Plaza loop. And I've been attending as many of these meetings as I've been able to going back to 2019, and I've always been promised accessible parking, but I'm still not seeing it on the plans. Where will the new replacement accessible parking be for those of us that need access with a car, parking spaces, as the landowner was just referring to? You know, otherwise you're leaving out everyone who's differently abled, who needs access. You know, I just would like to see the inclusion of everyone, please, with accessible parking as really top of the list on this project. Thank you. That's all I have, but I'm still waiting to hear the answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to go back to Patrick O'Dowd. Patrick, if you're ready, you're unmuted, so please unmute yourself and begin to speak. So Patrick did have a question in the comment box, so I'll repeat it out loud. They asked, why not reconstruct the Abadi Harmer Adobe?
Why not construct? I'm sorry.
Sorry, reconstruct.
Reconstruct. Okay.
Reconstruct, yeah.
Thank you.
And that's all we have today for the public question.
Thank you. I think we're getting the hang of it. I think we all get muted at the same time. Thank you so much. So I think now, are we not all unmuted? Vice Chair Wiscombe? So
Oh, now I am.
Now you
I
are.
wasn't.
Okay.
This is the first time
Okay.
this has ever happened. Yeah.
Thank you. So I think what we will do is go back through topic by topic, starting with the arcade. Those who want to speak first, and then I'll be sure to call on anyone who hasn't spoken yet, just to make sure that we've gotten to everyone on input. So back to the arcade, and if there's nothing specific, well, I'll leave it at that. Commissioner Longstreet, did you? Or okay, well, we can go in order then too. Vice Chair Wiscombe, did you have comments on the arcade?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I really like the openness of the trellis. If that could go, that's option 3. If that could just go up there. And I also like option 1. I know Mr. Piker prefers option 1, but I just felt this was really open, and then with the backdrop of trees, the greenery in the back, that this would achieve the objective of enclosing the plaza and providing the performance venue. So that's probably my choice, but it would be option 1 or option 3. I don't care for the square openings. The colonnade with the square openings, option number 2. Thank you. We can't hear anyone.
Oh, we could hear you, Ms. Wiscombe. Now can you hear? Mr. House, we can't.
There we
can't.
go.
There we
All
go.
right. Since you asked me to be more opinionated.
Yes, I would like your considered opinion on which one you prefer.
Well, I agree with Vice Chair Wiscombe about the square openings. That was my least favorite. Like I said, I don't have a strong opinion of them. I think openness is important, but also the perception of an enclosure. So I think the trellis idea needs more study in terms of proportion. Right now, it's a disadvantage to be so aware of the parking lot behind. And so the trellis option is not entirely solving that problem, which maybe just needs more landscaping. Maybe it's the proportions of the columns, it's the height of the trellis. All that needs to be taken into consideration. But I think that's a valid approach, the trellis, or I'm also fond of the arches. Addressing Commissioner Drury's question about aligning it with the city hall and straightening it out, I'm not sure if he's aware that the angled orientation of it is in response to a suggestion by the historical consultants that it be at this angle to reflect the angle of the Harmer adobe. So there's a reason for it. And I know, being an architect and having clients, that some people like everything all lined up in a straight line and neat and tidy, and others are more comfortable with a more organic arrangement. And I would put myself in the latter category. I think that since there's a reason behind this, it's not arbitrary, and I'm accepting of it. Thank you.
Madam Chair?
Commissioner Drury, yes.
Yes, I'm aware of the reason. I don't understand why that little piece of wall would not actually be amplified by having 2 spaces on either side of it that are in line. I think that it sort of gets lost, and I don't see why a fairly significant structure is being proposed because of that sliver of wall. It makes no sense to me. I think that the arcade, I prefer the trellis. I think that the arcade itself needs to be smaller. I think the idea of making City Hall subservient or only equal to that arcade is the wrong idea, the wrong approach. So those are my comments. Except as I say something that I prefer the trellis, I do prefer the trellis idea. Thank you.
Thank you. And then I'm also noting here the idea of amplifying the wall as opposed to having it fade in, I think is, I'm agreeing with that as well. And then I suppose we'll go in order if there isn't anyone else. Commissioner Longstreet, yes.
What's most pleasing to my eye are the arches. It feels, it just feels like it would complete the plaza, but the trellis I could also go with. I really am not fond of those fat columns, the squareness of it. It just seems like it does not fit in. From my perspective, I would think what we're looking at now is it doesn't give the prominence to City Hall that will be there in reality when the buildings are built. It's the view to me that makes this look like it overwhelms City Hall. And I just, I think this could be maybe a slightly smaller, but I do like the arches as and what they add to it.
Thank you. And Dr. Peterson.
Thanks. Can you hear me? I had to change headset.
Yes.
Okay, great. I also really prefer the openness of the trellis. I love that you can see through it. It looks light, but it also gives structure to that area for special events. And I would say my second choice would be the arches. I'm very sensitive to the concern that it mimics or competes with City Hall. And so, that's why it would be a second choice. And I also didn't respond well to option 2 with the thick square columns, even though I appreciate that they look similar to the thick square columns on the porch of Plaza de la Guerra, but it just doesn't seem like the right space for something that's quite so heavy. Thank you.
Thank you. And we heard from Councilmember Herman.
Thanks,
yes, go ahead. Go ahead, Councilmember Herman. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair. Much with our colleagues, I would say that the thing that I feel strongest about is not option 2. So that's my strongest feeling. I also like both 1 and 3. I would say for me, like Commissioner Longstreet, I reacted best to the arches. And the reason for that for me is that it conveys more of a sense of permanency. And my initial reaction to the trellis, while I liked it and do like it and would be very happy if we ended up in that direction, is it just doesn't have the same sense of permanency to me. And so perhaps that can be overcome with significant landscaping. So I'm very open to the trellis, but since we have to take a vote, I would say my first choice is the arches, but I'm similarly happy with the trellis with landscaping that really sort of gives it some heft. Thanks, Madam.
Thank you. And Commissioner Perry.
Thank you, Chair Snedden. I think I'm agreeing with most. I like the trellis because it doesn't seem as much as a barricade to the plaza. And as this structure is coming forward, it's shrinking that area. So having the arbor there doesn't have the same impact as being a wall. And I think it'll open itself up. I am curious, is the pepper tree behind is being preserved, correct?
I believe so. Yeah.
Yes.
One other comment. This is it reminds me very much of the arbor that sits outside of the library at City College. So if anyone wanted a similar view, go up and look at what's there. It's comparable.
Thank you. And I believe we've heard from everyone. Okay, so I'll weigh in also. I agree that it's the maybe perspective when we're looking at the arches. The arches, I think, do run the risk of overpowering City Hall, but I'm not sure if it's the perspective or not. I mean, from this direction, it looks like it's almost as tall, but isn't as tall as City Hall. And I like the openness of the trellis, but there's something angular about it that I'm not sure flows exactly. And this is not my area of expertise. It's just looking at it and looking at all of the arches of the arcades. I'm becoming less certain about an arcade at all. And that's just where I am right now, that maybe an elevated platform, but not necessarily a large structure enclosing it. And I am just thinking about what Commissioner Drury said about amplifying the wall as opposed to having it recede. It's already, most people don't even know the wall is there because it's covered with vegetation, and I'm just wondering about that. It's not direction, but just comments that I'm not sure I'm completely on board with an arcade, but I think the trellis option or the arches, but I think we're all in agreement. We can sum that up, that anything but the square arches, I think. And thank you for looking at that and taking time with that. Are there any other comments on the arcade before we move on to the water feature? Mr. Hess.
Madam Chair, I just want to point out a couple things. The trellis, just with respect to ongoing maintenance, don't know if any of you have a trellis, but they're usually made of wood. They're usually treated, but at the same time, they will require ongoing maintenance from the city. So it is something definitely to consider as part of this, whereas the arches and the design that's currently on the screen would not require that. Additionally, one thing that we've been really wrestling with is the current power transformer that is in the middle of the plaza that looks like a mini circus tent. That needs to be relocated somewhere. And in discussions with Edison, the best location will be somewhere behind this arcade. So while we don't have a defined location yet, there will be a place where we need a panel. So putting it on the end of one of those, whether it's the trellis or if it's the arches, it will need to go there. Just wanted to make sure everyone knew that.
Thank you. Helpful information. I think so. Then I'll settle on the arches as the, and I think that is also to Councilmember Harmon's discussion of permanence. And I think as an aside too, if you do with the trellis, with vegetation, they do tend to attract rats. Just as an aside there too. Okay, let us discuss the water feature. If there are any comments, I think one of the main things we're looking for comments on is the water feature at the south end or the water feature centered, or any other discussion on that. Commissioner House. Yes.
Well, I'll start with full disclosure, and that is that I provided a sketch of something similar with the water feature in the center to Chair Snedden and to Mr. Hess. I strongly prefer the water feature in the center. I just have a feeling that if you're approaching from De La Guerra, you have this vast expanse of an elongated plaza and this feature at the far end that you're not certain what it is. If you're approaching from the Placita, you're immediately your vision is kind of cut off of exploring into the center of the plaza. I just think having it in the center from either approach draws your eye into the plaza. And I think that's a far more successful layout. Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Sorry.
Member Harmon, yes.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I just wanted to weigh in. I think both are great. I really like it in the middle similarly. I think it looks awesome. I did want to just note one of the comments, and I apologize, I don't remember who made it, noted that with the water feature in the middle, it really will become truly a focal point on a hot day with all the kids running around. I personally am totally comfortable with that. But I know some of the comments from our commission members were expressing some discomfort just with the notion of this becoming an area for wet kids to be running around. And you know, for me, that doesn't bother me at all. I think it's great. And that I'm happy with that being the center of it on a hot day. But I would just caution us to remember that while aesthetically from above, you know, it may be more pleasing, it might exacerbate some of the concerns that folks have about the very essence of a water feature to put it right there in the middle. So I'll just say, you know, I'm comfortable with either. I'm happy in both places. And to me, I love the idea of our city's families being the focal point of this area. So to me, that's exactly what I had hoped that this redesign would do for this space. So I'm into it, but I am comfortable with both. And I did just want to point out that I really can see that happening, putting it in the middle and it just overpowering on a summer day, everything else that may be there. To me, that's great. But I guess I wanted to, you know, as someone that will be using this with my toddlers, I wanted to just be clear that this will take over. But I like both. I like the middle and you know, I'll leave it to the designers, I guess, to decide what they think is best. But the middle looks great to me as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Harmon. And I think in one of the pre-meetings, we saw also the water being so much lower than we originally had it. And I think that also speaks to the discussion. Yeah, there, thank you. Of, you know, the images we have of people being soaking wet from head to toe or younger people. This is really a lower splash of water. So I think that speaks to that as
Madam
well.
Chair?
Commissioner Drury, yes.
Yes, I would agree with Commissioner Howes, not to keep the peace at the Landmarks Commission, but just because I think his idea is very good in terms of sight lines. I would support having the water feature in the middle of the plaza. Thank you.
Thank you. We've come a long way with this water feature. Okay, thank you. Commissioner Longstreet, yes.
I will be happy with it in any location. But for me, it balances out against Plaza, against the de la Guerra, Casa de la Guerra at the other end. It feels like then we have anchors at either end of the plaza. So I like the pavement. I like how it just gives us a focus to that end.
Thank you. And Vice Chair Wiscombe. And then Dr. Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I Commissioner Longstreet. I really on the balance and also Councilmember Harmon, although she's comfortable with it in the middle, I think on hot summer days when there's lots of kids playing in the water, it's just nice to have a space in the plaza that is, so it's not right smack in the middle and people have to walk around it if they don't want to get wet. Or, you know, when kids play, they're not paying attention to where they're going. All over the place. I know that from my grandkids, and, you know, running into other people and getting excited. I just think that this is a better spot for it. I'm also a little bit concerned about the archaeological issues of moving it to the center. I don't think that should drive it, but I do think that we should be considering that. And so with that reason and the fact that it will be an active water feature on hot days, and the fact that, as Commissioner Longstreet says, there is balance between the Casa and this end. And it also kind of activates this end of the plaza where Store Clasita has been kind of in some committee members' minds who've grown up here, you know, kind of a scary place to be. I think this is going to become a place that's more activated and people can enter and go directly to the water feature. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Wiscombe. And Dr. Peterson.
I'm also really pleased with how it's turning out. I think it's become subtle, but still very effective. I do like the lower spray that we saw in that drawing as well. And, you know, I could have gone either way on the location, but I do find the designer's argument convincing that it serves well as an anchor on one end. And I also have concerns about the archaeology of, impacts if we try to put it in the middle. Thank you.
Thank you. And have we heard from Commissioner Perry?
I thought the water feature was put on the shelf by HLC. And if it hasn't been set aside, I really don't think De La Guerra Plaza is the place for a children's playground. Realistically, it's a hot day and I've got kids and I want to cool them off. Whether I'm a local or I'm a tourist, I'm going to the beach. I don't think it's going to get the type of usage that you might think it will. There's alternatives for recreational water play in our city that I think are going to capture that. If it does go in, I would put it towards the south end. I think having the elongated, I think the separation from the casa, I think it's best served at that point.
Thank you, Commissioner Perry. I will add that in the joint meeting with the HLC, very productive conversation back and forth. And I think that discussion, I believe all the members of HLC were supportive of a water feature at grade that didn't have high spraying water and that could go down to grade or be off and not present when it was turned off, if that's consideration in there too. And I will finish up those statements too by saying I think that this is a perfect feature for families, for children, and even for grown-ups to cool your feet. It's not the beach is a whole ordeal in a day, and parks are a whole deal in a day. But if you're downtown with children, and I will say I think we're looking for places where all ages have activated space. So I'm very much in favor of the water feature as it is. I originally was strongly towards the south end, but I've been swayed sort of towards the center. So I think wherever it ends up making the most sense, I like that it elongates the plaza on the south end. And I think, really the plaza's, it's going to be a feature in the plaza no matter where it is. And I think wherever it makes archaeological sense, wherever it makes plumbing sense on where those water tanks can go. But I think the south end, but I think most of us, we have a tally there of a direction to go. Do we need stronger direction than that, Mr. Hess, or is that enough for you to move forward?
Madam Chair, I believe that's enough. Thank you.
Thank you. And so how are we, let's see. Our next one to discuss is the restrooms. And Mr. Hess, could you give us a little bit more detail? We had a caller with sort of maybe a different perspective on that. And maybe we're not ready to fully discuss this yet. If more conversations need to happen with property owners, and that would be fine today too, but I'll have you direct that, what you need from us on this item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, Mr. Chaffee brought up a couple of different points that I think will probably need to go into the negotiations rather than it being more of a policy-driven decision. The direction I think we're looking at is, as we've looked at alternative locations other than Stork Placita, we really looked at it from, what's going to make the most sense for the public and the use of the plaza, and who will be using this and how do we want them to use it. So we think that the Stork Placita area, it makes the most sense. So the two options that we're looking at really come down to is the committee comfortable with, if we use the ironwork space, having the restroom actually on the plaza with a similar look. It won't look like that because they're going to be high-tech restrooms. Or if you're not comfortable with it actually being on the plaza, around the corner in Stork Placita. So that's really where we're looking for direction, because I think it's more of a policy and conceptual decision in some ways, because I think we may or we may not be able to work out the details of the real estate transaction. But if that's the preference, then we certainly we need to keep all of that in mind. So I hope that answers the question.
It does, thank you, and helps frame the question. I'll begin on this one that I'm not comfortable with it on the plaza. To have that sort of architectural space right there turn into an industrial restroom doesn't seem as appealing to me as if it's on the Placita. So those would be my comments on that. And if any,
Madam Chair.
yes, Mr. Drury.
Yes, I would be in line with you. I'd like to see before the real estate transaction business came up, when we first started this project with Mr. Hess and Mr. McKay, I think that they had a pretty significant architectural building that would house the high-tech bathrooms, and it seemed to fit the Placita quite well, and I still would support that.
Thank you. Mr. House?
I am fully supportive of this new idea of using the existing building. My understanding, and perhaps I'm wrong, is that the only thing that would change outwardly is that the doors would need to be appropriate for restrooms, but otherwise the configuration of the building would be the same and it would just house these restrooms. I like that idea. I don't have a problem that it faces the plaza. It's more obvious where the restrooms are, and I think it can be done discreetly so, you know, people aren't going to feel ill at ease using the restrooms that are facing the plaza. But I feel that locating them around the corner in the Placita further relegates the Placita to kind of a service corridor feeling. And it's not an attractive thing. And I like the idea. I understand there are a lot of big challenges to overcome in making this a reality. But if the swap were to allow the owner of that building to expand a little bit towards the Placita, to the extent there were storefronts or anything like that along the Placita, that would really activate it and make it something that would feel more comfortable to walk down and have a reason for being. So I think it on many fronts is advantageous.
Thank you. Commissioner Longstreet.
To follow up on those comments, it's hard to say without knowing what's proposed to go into the Placita. What are we trading for? So if we're trading for a building to come out 3 more feet into the Placita with just a big blank wall, that doesn't benefit anything we're designing. So it's really hard to have an opinion, an educated opinion about it without knowing what that would look like.
Thank you. Commissioner Longstreet. Dr. Peterson and Vice Chair Wiscombe.
I had the same concerns about the trade idea as Commissioner Longstreet, that seems like our choice is either bathroom in Stork Placita or potentially a much larger building that makes Stork Placita even more narrow and potentially, as Commissioner Reed had said, creepy to walk down. And you know, there could end up being a lot more square footage eaten up by a much larger building than would be eaten up by this not very large restroom. And I'm concerned about that as well. But you know, Commissioner House's idea of having open storefronts on Stork Placita is really intriguing. I just don't know if the design has gone that far, but I think that could really help activate the space. So I also would prefer not to have the bathrooms on the plaza, but I understand that. I think that was something that was important to HLC to keep it out of the Placita. So anyway, I also feel like we don't have enough information to know if the trade is to the benefit of the public use of the plaza and Placita.
Thank you. And Vice Chair Wiscombe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with your original comments. I think I don't prefer the restrooms facing the plaza. I think, you know, if you get a line outside or whatever, it just it's a more functional thing. It's a necessary thing. I prefer them on the Placita. Thank you.
Thank you. And have we heard from Councilmember Harmon?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yeah, my initial reaction is I prefer them on the Placida. I'm open to this exchange idea, but similarly, I don't really know. I don't know enough about it, I guess. So my response is, I'm not a hard no in any circumstance, but I'm a potentially yes. It could work. I think also the design of the restrooms is going to make a big difference to me as to whether I'm comfortable with it being on the plaza or not. I mean, if it looks very, very industrial, then I think definitely not. It's not a direction I would want to go. But if it's, well designed and there's a way that it kind of blends in, then I could be comfortable with it. So that's a non-answer too, which I apologize for. I guess just in general, my preference is for the Placida, but I like the creativity in the exchange idea, and I'm open to it depending on how the details play out. Thanks.
Thank you. And thank you. And Commissioner Perry, if you wanted to comment on this.
I'm just going to go with popular opinion. If there's going to be a restroom, it should be on the Placida side.
Thank you. And so I think I will sum that up by saying that it maybe needs some more discussion. I think those who prefer it on the Placida are also possible. I think we're all possibly preferring it in certain places and would need to know more about what's happening with the Placida. I will add too that I think in some of our discussions about the restroom being on the Placida, it was going to have wayfinding, maybe information, maybe there was a kiosk, maybe there wasn't. I think the Placida could maybe be activated with carts rather than like more permanent carts, but just, a smaller, but we haven't really discussed that in detail. So I'm wondering if you have enough information to continue considering this, but I don't think we've come to a decision point. Does that sound, Mr. Hess?
Yes, Madam Chair. Clearly, there's some ambivalence. There's information that you don't have, and I totally understand and respect that. I think the challenge is that this is an ongoing discussion that requires some direction, but at the same time, in the end, it's ultimately going to end up being a choice, one or the other. So I think what we'll do is we'll continue down parallel paths. I think we'll spend a little bit more time looking at what the actual design could be on the Placita side. With respect to Commissioner House's comment, the caveat to this is that we can't control what the landlord or the owner of that building will ultimately do with their building. So if we make this real estate exchange, we might have an idea of what we want for the Placita side of things, but in reality, it's going to be up to them and their project. So, and who the tenant is and all of that. So there are still multiple unknowns. So instead of rambling, I'll turn that back over to Leaf.
Chair Snedden, I could maybe just very briefly provide a visual for people to wrap their heads around the idea of this industrial style restroom. It may help as you're imagining it. Really what we're talking about is the shell that you see on the screen would remain exactly the same with the exception of the door openings. They would be most likely a stainless steel because they're sliding doors. So it'd be like almost like an elevator door inserted into those doorways. Other than that, the shed roof, the plaster, all that could stay the same. So maybe that helps as people are thinking about it.
Thank you. To me, actually, that pushes me over to the side of not having it on the plaza, the steel doors. Maybe we could do one more just quick round, since it looks like we maybe need further direction on if you have a strong preference, one or the other, or if you think that would be helpful, Mr. Hess, if you need more direction, or I don't want to leave it two parallel paths for too long.
Yes, Madam Chair. I actually think it would be helpful.
So let's do a lightning round. Okay.
Yeah, I hesitate on that though, because again, the comments were we don't have enough information from some of those. So I guess I'm okay with it being tabled for another time when you do have more information.
Let's just do one more quick round to see if through the discussion we have any further decision points. Vice Chair Wiscombe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Placita. It's my one word.
Okay. Commissioner House.
One word, Plaza.
Okay.
No, I think we need more information, and it may totally fall apart because it's not in the cards to work something out with the building owner. So I would prefer to stay on parallel paths and keep exploring that. I think they're design solutions. They don't have to be shiny stainless steel doors. Those doors can be ordered with a different finish to them. So I think architecturally it can fit in. There could be some other kind of screening so that you're not looking right at the restrooms as much. So I think we should keep it open.
Okay. So open
Madam
is
Chair.
Yes, Commissioner
Sorry,
Drury.
Madam. I will waffle. I will go with Placita pending further information.
Okay. Commissioner Longstreet.
I would go with Placita, partly because I think it also services State Street and what goes on there.
That's my thinking as well. And then Councilmember Herman.
There we go. Thanks. Sorry about that. Yeah, I'm still inclined toward the Placita. Similarly, I remain open to being convinced to something else. I mean, I'm particularly sensitive to the property owners, so I just want to make sure that I don't want to forestall that conversation necessarily. But yeah, I'll leave it at that. I'm Placita, leaning heavily. Thanks.
Thank you. And Dr. Peterson.
I'm also inclined towards the Placita, but could be convinced as the design develops.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Perry, I think we heard.
Same opinion. Placita, yeah, Placita side.
Thank you. And then I'll add in the two, leaning towards Placita, and then also I think several of us could be convinced otherwise. Does that help?
Yes, it does. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And now let us talk about the planting. And would you help us frame the questions we should be answering on the plantings?
I could jump in. I think really not a lot's changed. So I think we're just looking for validation that this is still a good course to be moving forward with.
Thank you. And then I think we might want to be considering HLC's comments or questions about whether the raised beds are appropriate for this area or not, and if we're committed to that. Okay.
Yeah.
Does any, yes, Vice Chair Wiscombe and then Commissioner House.
Commissioner House, you want to go first?
Oh, okay. I was the voice on HLC that was fine with the arrangement as proposed. I certainly like the raised planters, provides seating, keeps people from walking in the landscaping or standing in it during fiesta events, et cetera, protects the lighting that will be in it for uplighting trees. So I think there are many reasons for that. So I will validate this design.
Thank you. And Vice Chair Wiscombe.
Very well put. I totally agree. Just a couple comments. The planters are important to provide seating, but as Mr. McKay said, they also protect the vegetation, which I think is really important, because the plantings in this plaza are going to be really, really important for a lot of reasons. And I also wanted to add that when we were talking about the arcade and perhaps the trellis was a little more open, there are, the designers have provided 2 new trees behind the structure. So I think there'll be a really nice green screw, whether it becomes the arches or the trellis, there'll be a nice green screen behind that kind of softens the effect of the parking lot and really anchors that side. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councilmember Harmon.
I like this. I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And then we'll have Commissioner Drury, are you available?
Yes, I am. I would agree with Commissioner House because it's always safe to do so. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Longstreet, I see a thumbs up for the record. Okay, and we have Dr. Peterson. Yes.
I'm supportive of the design as well.
Thank you. And Commissioner Perry.
I'm going to stay in agreement that I like the plan
Okay.
and incorporating the CASA beautifully.
Okay, thank you. And I think also from your perspective with Fiesta, these work well in their configuration with Fiesta? I know that would be a question we'll have.
I've been waiting to sort of see an infrastructure as to how the underground utilities are going to come in and they're going to preserve booth space. But what was said earlier about protecting the landscape and preserving it and providing seating, I think it lends itself to a festival very well. So you're going to have a lot of those hardscapes be functional for festivals and things that occur. Seating's always been lacking during the mercados. So a good plus.
Thank you. Did you have something to add to that, Mr. Hess?
I do, Madam Chair. I just wanted to let you know that we are meeting with actually Old Spanish Days on July 13th. So they'll see this plan and we'll just confirm both the booth layout that could work with this plan as well as get more information from them regarding infrastructure.
Thank you. Very helpful. I know we have a lot of people concerned that it will still be usable in that way. And then I think I'll add that I also highly supportive of this plan. When I think back to the original shade structures and bench seating that were proposed and how far we've come from that to having the sort of natural shading of the trees, the benches that will be beautiful and lit and with protected landscaping in there. And I'm highly supportive of this as making an inviting, welcoming space that can also be passively enjoyed. I do also appreciate that the CASA is framed better. And to the public comment that we had about that there were still trees in De La Guerra, those are existing trees. Those aren't new plantings. I just want to confirm that along De La Guerra Street there, that those aren't proposed new plantings along there. So it should not affect any later discussions about circulation patterns in there too. So I again, this is another one of those that's come a long way and really through the back and forth and with input, and it's supportive. So I think that's unanimously supportive, and thank you. Yeah. So the next topic to discuss is the City Hall frontage. And again, I'll ask you to help frame the question of what it is that you need for this committee to weigh in on, if it's general comments or if there are specific areas where you need direction.
Sorry, it always takes a second, Madam Chair, for everything to kick in. I think I would like comments on whether the committee feels that we are on the right path with the goal. Secondly, there are some features that we've highlighted, such as the relocation of the palm tree, which, just as a quick side note, I've worked with 2 very prominent landscape companies that specifically relocate large specimen trees. Both have assured me that this is feasible. Putting a grass family tree into an area that has more availability toward irrigation, this could be a very successful move. The second is the flagpoles, and just the prominence that we have on the corner lends itself to highlighting those flags, whereas right now they're stuck in the middle, but we don't really use them. This would give us the opportunity to use them. And whether or not the overall look and feel is what we are expecting from the front of City Hall. So kind of those 4 points. Thank you.
Thank you. It's very, very helpful. Are we discussing the parking at all at this point? Or is it, you didn't mention that as something, and I would actually be fine to wait on talking about the parking until we've had our circulation study, but is that something that you need us to discuss now?
Well, I think that we would love to hear your comments on it, but we are also in need of a lot more information. And so this is preliminary. This is assuming that if we didn't have State Street open and we didn't utilize the other side of De La Guerra Street toward State Street, you know, this is just a short-term parking supplement. But I think there's a lot to study still. So feel free to comment, but just know that we definitely want to come back to this.
Thank you. That's helpful. So if nobody pops up, I'll call on Vice Chair Wiscombe. Or there we go, Commissioner Longstreet.
Well, I'm very excited that this will be addressed. I think it is long overdue. I like the flagpoles on the corner. I think to up the street at Carrillo to the bank, it kind of follows that trend down the street. I like that we're able to move the palm tree not very far so that it stays in the area. I think there's an opportunity with the parking to do a separate bollard system down at the other end of the parking to maybe preserve that parking if it helps to address some of the concerns we're hearing from the businesses. Just the refreshing of that whole area is very important. There's a dead tree there. There's a lot happening that needs to be remedied at this point, and I look forward to opening up. I think to the library, that beautiful door in the library that we never saw until it was addressed, it feels like that same kind of project to me. So it's exciting.
Thank you. And Commissioner House. Oh, Commissioner Drury.
Oh, you heard my little attempt. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I think this is, I park on Anacapa in front of City Hall every time I need to come down there because I love that elevation. And I'm always surprised that it's never swept, that there's trash in the sidewalks. And it's really a shame. And I'm really happy that this is being addressed as part of this project. So I think that I guess I could go either way with the flagpoles. But the problem is there's 3 of them. So you don't have the opportunity of putting one right in the middle of the pathway and framing the building that way. So I think on the corner would be just fine. But I do think that the 3 trees or bushes in front that are proposed are a mistake. I think when that facade, that elevation is cleaned up, it's really a lovely architectural addition to our city that's been forgotten, basically. I think those 3 trees should be not there. I would certainly support the removing of the hedge, but I think some sort of something beyond ballers. I think maybe a low stone wall painted white to formalize the entrance coming along De La Guerra and turning the corner on Anacapa. And I think there's the small green tree that's on the plan, what is looking pretty sickly, and I think that should be replaced as well. So I think that that 2 or 3, I guess 2.5 story elevation should be certainly washed with a power wash and repainted and revitalized in that respect. But I fully support anything that will make that a much better elevation. Thank you.
Thank you. And Commissioner House.
Well, I would largely agree with those comments. I think the flagpoles are appropriately located. You know, this entrance is on the short end of the structure, and so framing that with flagpoles seems to make less sense. In addition to the fact of the large pine tree. So I think the corner is a good idea, and it announces that it's a civic municipal building. So I like that. I agree with that comment of Commissioner Drury about those 3 new trees along Anacapa. If the point is to see this building we haven't really appreciated, why plant some more trees in front of it? So there might be a better approach there. I mean, I like the idea from the photographs, but I don't think this is the same kind of setting. The only thing I'll say about the parking, I see that there is an unloading zone for an accessible space, and it's probably a good idea to have 2 spaces, one on either side of the accessible or of the offloading zone, because that is the closest to the ramp up to the entry to City Hall. So I think that's been addressed. I don't know how many accessible spaces there are right now, but I think that this goes a long way to addressing it. And yeah, the other comment was that I think this needs to be evaluated by the architectural historian, whether there are any elements that are significant, such as the hedge, and their opinion on moving the palm tree. So that's a question to be answered. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you. And Vice Chair Wiscombe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have one quick question for Leith, if he could pop on here, just, and thank you. The slide before this one that shows the kind of before and after landscape examples. No, it's not that one. It must be the one before that. Yeah, that one. So are you also proposing understory plantings here to create a more water-wise garden looking environment at City Hall?
Yes, exactly. It's
Okay.
next time you see this, it'll be more illustrated to show that. But it's one of its goals is to be a demonstration garden for sort of water conservation and climate appropriate plantings. So definitely.
Great, thank you for that. I thought that was the case based on this slide, but so I like the landscaping. I think we want to make sure when the frontage gets done that it is safe. It's safe and the lighting is really good. So I think that's going to be very important here. And I like the drop box for the bills on the other side of Anacapa. I think that's great. The relocation of the flags, I think it's very appropriate. It's a very appropriate location, and where the tree is getting, the Washingtonian's getting relocated, it provides a nice balance with the kind of height of that tree and the height of the flagpoles, I think, on either side, flanking either side. So I'm pretty happy with that. And getting rid of the hedge, I think, is entirely important. Hoping it has no historic value, because that's really what
oh my.
I hate to open that can of worms, because that's really what closes off this frontage from really 2 streets. And let's see, what else? I like the sandstone bollards. I like the openness of them at the parking. And I think, yeah, my other comment was to make this a model landscape. We always ask our community to replace grass and do water-wise gardens. And this could really be a model for that kind of environment, for ideas for the community and just for the beauty of it, how, you know, gee, water-wise doesn't have to look, you know, doesn't have to look thirsty all the time. It can live and thrive and be green and colorful and look really nice. So I think those are my comments. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Vice Chair Wiscombe. And Councilmember Harmon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just add my voice to the chorus of support on this. You know, I walk down Anacapa at least a couple times a week, and I'm constantly, I mean, almost every time I walk by this frontage, just think how beautiful it is and how much potential there is. And it has always confused me too that that we don't use this, and this is indeed the front, and it's got so much potential, and I'm really happy about this. I'm really excited. I like the flagpoles. I wanted to point out, as a number of other people have, that I think that's a great location, and I don't, apologies, I don't remember who made this point, but the connection between the bank and the post office, it's really just a lovely sort of continuity on the few blocks there of Anacapa. So I really like it, and really appreciate the care that's gone into thinking about this frontage, and I'm super excited for what it's going to be. Thanks.
Thank you. And have we heard from Commissioner Perry? Oh, and Dr. Peterson as well.
Should I let Ann go first?
You're on screen. You please go ahead. Yeah.
All I can say is long overdue. Love the flagpoles. Love the fact that that side of City Hall will become more welcoming, because it isn't in its current state. So hats off to the professionals who are going to dress it up.
Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Peterson.
I'm just supporting everyone else's comments. It is long overdue. I think the landscaping potential is really inspiring. I do support Commissioner Drury's remark that the 3 proposed new trees at the front don't need to be there and would take away from the facade of the building. I'm also supportive of removing the hedge if it's not a contributing resource. And I think the temporary parking and the bollards, I think that addresses, you know, in part some of the concerns we heard in public comment about access to buildings, but it also blends in really well with the pedestrian use of the majority of the area. And so I think it accomplishes both. And I like the removable bollards so that the area can be closed for public festivals when needed. So, so I'm very excited about this. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we've heard Commissioner Drury. Are you?
Madam Chair, yes, you heard me mumbling. I just have two comments. One is that if we're going to do this wonderful thing to the front elevation of City Hall, and we're going to have parking or any access on De La Guerra, it would be nice to have a pathway connecting to the steps. A formal, not just walking across decomposed granite, but an actually dedicated pathway made out of maybe just concrete to match the one that exists to the steps that lead up to the front doors. And then the other is rather pie in the sky. This is my last comment, is that there's these vast parking areas owned by the news press, I believe, that hopefully will come into play at some point. That'll relieve the difficulty of losing parking spaces through this project. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Commissioner Drury. And then I'll do you have something, Mr. Hess, or I'll close out? Okay.
I actually have one comment. I believe Leith has a comment as well, Madam Chair.
And then I'll have a comment also.
Okay. If I may, I just wanted to address the accessibility parking spaces. Currently, there are 0 parking spaces for ADA in the entire loop or on De La Guerra Street. I just confirmed it with Google Earth just to make sure I wasn't saying something that was inaccurate. Our plan currently is to use the ADA spaces that are available in the City Hall parking lot for accessible entry. I have not confirmed that as a plan that I can count on, but that is what we have had in mind, because those are, for the most part, unused spaces. It is a great path of travel from those parking spaces to the ADA ramp on the De La Guerra side of City Hall. So that would be the accessible path of travel. Thanks.
Thank you. And Mr. McKay?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Several of you brought it up, so I thought I'd just weigh in on the historical landscape at the front there. The hedge and the big aloe or succulent right on the corner, that we've already vetted that through our historic consultants, post-Hazeltine. So what we're showing you, we're confident that it passes that litmus test.
Thank you. I think we're all relieved to hear that. None of us seem attached to the hedge at this point. So I'll finish out my comments. I love the idea of a demonstration garden that's beautiful and is leading example of what it could be. And I think the whole plaza in that too. It's really a really big shift from all of the grass that we have. And if we can really show that it can be cooling and beautiful and still take into account our drought conditions and climate, I really love that idea. I like the direction that this is going. I think it's really exciting to think about what this space could be. And right now it's really sort of behind hedges and dark and just not very welcoming. And it is such a beautiful entranceway there. I'm love the drop box locations. I think the more convenience that we can offer the public for that, the better, without having to park and come in. Although I like when people come into City Hall because I think it connects people, but to have to isn't really our goal. I agree that the relocated palm tree balances the flagpoles. If for some reason the palm tree doesn't make it, I do want it also to be the flagpoles to be balanced on their own. My one question on that is if it blocks the sight line to the mountain views there. Those are really pretty spectacular views to the mountains. So if maybe they were on the on this figure on the left-hand side of this top left frontage there, maybe that's a consideration there too. But I like where the flagpoles are in proposed, and I'm fine with that. But just checking on the sight line. And then I think we should check in with our architectural historian on any number of things beyond the hedges too. So I think that will give us two sources of approval for the historical side of that. And then for the parking, overall, I think we need to do a more full assessment of the accessibility. I mean, even if there are 0 designated spaces now, I'm not feeling that 1 designated space is enough with all of the changes. If someone who doesn't need to park nearby is inconvenienced by parking a block away, that's one thing. But if someone who needs access is losing all those other possibilities, I'm not comfortable that 1 space is enough. I think we should be evaluating the spaces along, well, in this figure, it'd be the right-hand side, the City Hall parking spaces along there that are currently, I think, staff spaces that could maybe be adjusted. And I want to make sure there's an access from that parking lot. So say there was parking along that edge, that there could be then access into the plaza from that direction as well. And that the proposed arcade that's raised or has elevations doesn't impact the ability to get into the plaza on a wheelchair with ease. Oh, thank you. This is a very helpful figure there. So the wall is there along there now, but I'm just concerned if there's the wall and then with that little opening, if it opens right into the arcade that isn't a flat or a ramped elevation. I just don't want it to be so difficult for someone who needs access to be able to get into City Hall. So I would keep looking at that. I think the 1 space isn't adequate, and I think we should maybe check in with our accessibility experts to really invite that input now and build it into our design as we go, rather than at the end, if this is enough. So it might be a good time to get input on that. I like the idea to, I think when we get more information on the traffic flow too, like we had discussion about if cars went in here, how is it that they get back out? So which direction that traffic goes, and how far, if you're coming in and you can't see if all the spots are filled or not, and then you have to back out if you don't have a place to turn around. So I'm sure those are all things that will, of course, have to be taken into full consideration. Okay. I think that if there aren't, do you have what you need on that? But I think in general, everybody's very pleased with this direction going forward, and full support that this is getting the attention that it needs. And I'm excited that this is considered part of the plaza, so that we can we can take care of this all together. So thank you on that. And if you have a sorry, if you have anything to add there. And then I think, was that our last major topic? If you want to lead us into what our next steps are and what you need from us for the next meetings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We've received great direction and feedback today. I think because we don't know what will come of the parking and traffic study, nor the survey, I think I'd like to just request patience from the committee to the design team, that we will be continuing working on the design based on the feedback provided today, as well as informing the committee of the outcome of the points 1 and 2 that are on the screen now, the parking and traffic study as well as the survey. And I think that will help dictate the next steps. So if I could just ask you to indulge us with some time, we'd appreciate it.
I'm in support of that. I do think it's worthwhile talking about, and if you could let us know when we might talk about what would be on the email survey, if we have a chance to meet before that goes out, or if you want some input at this point. It's not something that we've talked too much about. I do think it's an excellent idea. We are in the process of seating the State Street Master Planning Committee, and when we, as you mentioned, when we first started talking about closing De La Guerra Street and making this a pedestrian only plaza, we didn't know what was going to happen with State Street. And I think there's a lot in there to ask the community about, and I'm not sure if that's part of what would be in this survey. I'd like that to be part of this survey, but input on that. Do you want input from us now on the survey, or is that something that we'll talk about before it goes out? Or
Madam Chair, I think because other than a concept right now, I think that we need some time, and then we will definitely seek input from the committee. It would probably be via email, not necessarily another meeting. So, but we do want your input, and yes, that will be, one of the primary focuses of this survey is because of the changes,
Okay.
So thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, I will, if anybody wants to come on and speak to this as well, but I think we have the patience to do this right. And there's a lot of new information, and I think we've given direction on enough now that it can wait a little while until we have more information that we just haven't been able to get yet. So I think I really appreciate that. Did you need direction on whether we should have an advisory committee meeting first or HLC, or did you want to wait?
Madam Chair, I think I'd like to wait.
Okay.
I think if the parking and traffic survey comes back in such a way, and the survey comes back in such a way that it's merely a confirmation of everything that we've been working toward, then I think it might be appropriate to just go straight to HLC. But my hunch is that we're going to need another advisory committee meeting before going back to HLC.
That's my sense as well. I think we'll want to see, especially with questions like the restrooms, you know, when we have more information and the traffic patterns and the parking. So I think unless you advise otherwise at a later time, I think we'll have patience, and an advisory committee meeting I think would be appreciated before we have any kind of joint meeting with HLC.
That sounds good. Thank you.
Are there any other comments from the committee? Okay, I just want to say how pleased I am with this process. I think it very much has been a back and forth and a conversation, and I'm really pleased with how things went with the conversation with HLC, and I think this could be a model for moving forward and in talking things through before they go to, you know, approval meetings on that. And I continue to welcome public input in all parts of this process, and particularly stakeholders around the plaza. This is always an invitation to please reach out to Mr. Hess, to myself, and to be part of these meetings, and to call in with your comments, write in with your comments, and we take them very seriously. And I think with that, we won't have, we'll be patient. We don't have our next scheduled meeting, and really with gratitude to the committee, I believe we're adjourned.
Thank you very much, Chair Seddon.